so on. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I know there are other choices for you. We are grateful that you decided to come and listen to us. We have a great panel today, so I'm thankful for the organizers who were able to collect them, and to them for coming. Some of them are coming a long way, staying just for one day to be here with us. Um, so let me just briefly kind of show who we have. So Heather Tomlin comes from the port. Oh, here is our final panelist. So now we have the full panel. So my name is Grace. I'm a faculty here. I've been involved with supply chain mobility for 17 years. Heather Tomlin is coming from the port of Long Beach. Kelly is coming from Cisco. Kevin Plant is coming from Sweet Greens. Eric Rademacher from Port of Rotterdam, and Lee Kimber from Maersk. I will not spend too much time talking about them. I will give them a few minutes to say something about themselves instead. So, as I just mentioned, we have people from very different industries here. So we have technology, food, logistics, and I would like first each of them to say a little bit about what are some of the issues and challenges and successes that they had in their industries and in their companies related to sustainability. So I think Irvin uploaded some slides. So let me just start. I think this is yours.
Yes, just to clarify, in my keynote, I talked that the Port of Rotterdam has two strategic goals. One of them is the digitalization, I talked about that, and the other one is the energy transition. And I put up just some slides, and we'll come back to that later on as well, where we are working on. So the Port of Rotterdam wants to play a pioneering role and give a world-leading example of this energy transition, because of the fact that not only we see the results of the marine and the logistics industry towards the climate change topic, but also what I explained, 50% of our revenue is directly or indirectly related to these fossil fuels, and we are constantly now trying to attract other industries like the biofuel, wind power, even the capturing of CO2, etc., to the port. So this is basically the background of the Port of Rotterdam, where we are working on, and I will explain that later in the panel.
Okay. So then I think I have some slides from Lee as well. So do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
And if those of you who can't see the slides, they're more for visual effect. If you want a copy, just drop me your card and we'll get you a copy. Sustainability used to be about philanthropy and about trying to do good in the world. But today it's more about being relevant. So if you'll flip to the second slide. Staying relevant in a changing world where our stakeholders' perceptions and expectations have definitely changed. And that's our internal stakeholders as well as our external stakeholders, the communities at large, the ports that we operate in, other business partners, our customers, but also our employees, our board members, and our investors. All have very different expectations today, and those expectations are evolving in the environmental, social, and governance areas as we go forward to the future. So how do we stay relevant in those areas? So on the next slide, you'll see basically we have defined 4 major project areas that we focus on and where we feel we have a particular responsibility or a particular leverage point, an ability to make a difference in the world. We also have that foundation that you have to have of environment, health, and safety, anti-corruption, diversity, those things that are the core parts of operating responsibly. So let's look quickly at those 4 projects that I talked about, what we call shared value projects. The first is having food loss in logistics. 800 million people in the world go to bed hungry every night. Doesn't that give you chills? And a third of the food that's produced is wasted. A third of that is lost between the farm and the market. And that's where we feel we have a particular ability to make a difference with our cold chain. We've had refrigerated containers. We have controlled atmosphere containers, ways that we can actually make a difference in the farmer's ability to get his crop, avocados or whatever it is, to the market in a desirable condition. So that's something that makes a big difference. We had a story in our sustainability report a couple of years ago about an avocado farmer in Kenya who, because we brought in a cold chain and also all of the mechanisms to make it work for him and his neighbors, was able to get those avocados to Europe, to the markets. The cool thing about it was not only did it help lift that whole community out of poverty, he was able to send his children to school. So there is a very personal and a future impact of these kinds of things that we don't often think about when we're doing these sorts of things. And we need to consider those and leverage them. And when we do a development like that, think about doing it in a way that helps make those positive movements happen. On the next slide, you'll see our second project, which is multiplying the benefits of trade. That somewhat meshes with that. Small businesses often have real barriers in terms of shipping. There are all kinds of paperwork. There is how do you get it stuffed into the containers. There's how do you track it, and then often small businesses pay more. So one of our efforts in terms of lifting people out of poverty is enabling them to take advantage of those benefits of trade by having data solutions, simplifying the paperwork that you have to ship things around the world. On the next slide, you'll see something that we feel very responsible for, and that is ship recycling. We operate 750 vessels around the world. They have an average lifetime of about 25 years. What happens to that vessel at the end of those 25 years, after it's moved from mainline into maybe a lesser feeder service or something like that, but it's just no longer really feasible to operate that vessel economically? You may have seen the 60 Minutes pieces about vessels that are run up on the beach in Bangladesh, and people without safety equipment, without training, even children, are involved in recycling those vessels. 85% of the world's vessels are still recycled that way. We are trying to make a change and make a difference in that, and we feel we have a particular responsibility there because we are the world's largest shipping line, the world's largest container shipping line. So since 2009, we've operated under our internal standards that go beyond the regulations that are out there. And then in 2014, 2015, our head of sustainability and our board decided we were tired of waiting for regulations. We were going to go to change something. So we went into Alang, India, and are trying to build capacity to recycle responsibly. And we've now recycled 8 vessels in a shipyard in Alang, India, and have committed additional ones. And the other shipyards in Alang are now working to meet the same standards. And those standards involve worker safety. They involve recycling of everything that comes out of that vessel. But they also involve worker housing, ensuring that you've only got adults doing the work and they're properly trained and have good safety equipment. Worker medical care. These are things that just were not happening. And so we are trying to change the world in terms of how vessels are recycled, and we feel a particular responsibility. Our global head of sustainability says that she's most proud of this in terms of something that we have done that was unique to something that only we could do. And we've also been founding members of what's called the, it just went out of my head, the Transparency Initiative, such that you can actually post what's happening with all of your vessels, and customers can then go and see, are you responsibly recycling your vessels? so that there is this new transparency initiative, and you'll see on the slide there. Oops. One back. There we go. The logos of some of the companies that have now joined this initiative. The last of the four is decarbonizing supply chains. So here we are at a supply chain conference. How do we actually reduce the CO2 footprint of moving things from one place to another? Again, we don't move it, we don't make anything, we don't grow anything, we just move it around. But that's an essential piece in all of the supply chains. So we have just made a commitment, it's a new commitment, to zero CO2 shipping by 2050. Now that sounds like it's forever away. I mean, even the younger folks in here are probably going to be retired by that point. But let's back that up. Remember I said vessels have a lifetime of about 25 years, which means that to have a zero carbon fleet by 2050, the vessels that we launch in 2025 to 2030 have to align with or be convertible to that strategy. So all of a sudden we're looking at, say, 2030 in terms of launching vessels that align with that new zero carbon strategy, which means we've got to be ordering those vessels in 2028, designing them in 2025 to 2027, which means we've got to make technology decisions in 2024. All of a sudden, that's less than 5 years. And we don't know how to do it all yet, and the technologies do not all exist yet. Usually when we make a big goal, we know where we're going. On this one, we have said to the world, we're gonna set this big goal out there. We're gonna do the first piece of it, continuing with efficiency. And we're already, by the way, down 41% per container per kilometer since 2008. And it's 47% versus 2007. So we've already made huge improvements in efficiency. But after a while, you can't keep improving the efficiency. So you've got to do something radically different, whether it is biofuels, hydrogen fuel cells, batteries. I mean, we're looking at all kinds of things, but we are also looking to reach out to innovators and to academia and other companies and say, partner with us, let's figure this thing out. Because we have to get there, and we have to get there a lot sooner than any of us really think if you don't do that math and bring it back to having to make those decisions before 2025. So that was the last of my slides, was just showing sort of how that happens. We did just do a pilot on biofuels. We took a EEE vessel, which is about a 20,000 TEU vessel, from Rotterdam to Shanghai and back on an up to 20% biofuel blend made from recycled European cooking oil with the Dutch. I believe you've been involved in this. With a Dutch consortium that's very interested in how do you make biofuels viable. Based on that, and that was in April, based on that, about 6 weeks ago, we announced our first zero carbon shipping product, where the customer could say, I want to ship these containers zero carbon. And we will then go out and buy that amount of biofuel. It's more expensive. The customer will pay an upcharge, but we will then burn it in that Asia-Europe run. Because remember, we're talking a global problem. So it doesn't matter where the carbon is generated or where it's reduced, as long as it's reduced. So we'll go out and buy that biofuel, we'll burn it in this vessel or one of its sister vessels, and the customer then gets full credit for that carbon reduction. So this is the first ever, it's a limited availability. We announced it about 6 weeks ago. And we've already got H&M and Nike have already stepped up, and we're talking to several other major global shippers who are looking at selectively trying this product so that we can actually start to put this into motion. Thank you. Heather?
Sure. Or you said Kevin?
I said Heather, but
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Heather.
I'll be quick. So I wanted to provide a few some background information on some of the main challenges and successes that we've had. And I know that we have some questions lined up from the panel and I'm sure from the audience as well. So I'll be brief, but I wanted to provide a little bit of background. So I am Heather. I'm with the Port of Long Beach. And as many of you know who live in the local area, Port of Long Beach, together with Port of Los Angeles, we're a large industrial port-related complex with a lot of activity, a lot of vessel activity, truck activity, terminal equipment, and others. And we're also located adjacent to local communities. And so all of the movement of goods, all of the activity that takes place at the port has a direct impact on the local communities that neighbor the ports, as well as throughout the entire region. The Southern California LA air basin is one of the worst in the country. And so we recognize the challenge of that and the activity that we have and the contributions that we make towards that. And we also take the responsibility of working with our industry partners to try to address those impacts. And so a lot of the challenges that we face as a port authority, as a landlord port, are that we don't directly own and operate any of the equipment that operates down in the port. But we try to work as a facilitator and an influencer, working with the industry partners, working with the technology developers, working with the regulatory agencies and the community and environmental groups and others to try to come up with strategies and solutions so that we can try to address the changes that we need to see. And there's obviously a lot of challenges with that. Lee has talked about a lot of the direction of where we're trying to go and the challenges that we need to address. We need solutions that don't actually even exist today. And so a lot of the focus that we've been engaged in is working with technology developers and our industry partners, our port operators, on developing and demonstrating new technologies that don't exist anywhere else in the world right now, and to try to implement those in a way that we can continue to be successful in doing the day-to-day operations that we need to be able to accomplish to be successful as ports. So we have a lot of efforts engaged in those areas right now with technology development and working with our partners. We've had a lot of success. Both ports came together originally back in 2006 with our first Clean Air Action Plan. We've made a couple updates to that since then. We currently have very aggressive goals going forward to get to zero emissions in the terminals by 2030 and for the on-road trucks by 2035. And we're working towards making progress with that. But over the last dozen years or so, with all of the strategies we've already been able to implement, we've been really successful at reducing emissions from port operations. Diesel particulate matter, which is primarily responsible for local community health, is down 88% from where we were in 2005. And that's a really significant change over a fairly short time frame to be able to get there. Our nitrogen oxide emissions, which lead to regional ozone smog in the basin, that's down 56% over that time period. One of the things we recognized is we also need to be more proactive in addressing greenhouse gas emissions going forward. That was not one of the original drivers for our programs, but increasingly so, we recognize that we have a part to play in making sure that we're addressing global climate change. And so a lot of our efforts going forward and the focus on zero emission technologies is to help us to continue to make progress in the direction of not only addressing community health and regional air quality concerns, but also addressing global climate change. And so a lot of the efforts that we've been making have been making progress towards those goals. So with that, I'll wrap up and we can save it for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So from transportation, we move to people who are making things. So Kevin, can you say something?
Sure. My name is Kevin Quant, and I work for a fast food restaurant chain called Sweetgreen. We have almost 100 locations in 8 major markets in the United States. And if you're hoping to hear about ports and containers, you may be disappointed. 92% of our food comes from domestic sources. So maybe someday, as international expansion or whatnot, that will change. Really, our model Our company's been around for 12 years, and we are at the intersection of healthy, sustainable, transparent, and delicious food. And what that usually results in is what looks like a salad in a bowl, although we hate being called a salad company, so we hope to do much more than that. What's unique about our supply chain, I think, compared to the restaurant industry, is we have what we call a decentralized model. With boots on the ground across the country, connecting directly with farmers and producers that we believe in and want to support. We call them stewards of the soil, or soil farmers who really care about sustainability as much as we do, and we try to access and use their food as much as possible. It adds complexity, but really to us is a non-starter. So some of the challenges we face is dealing with this complexity. We're in an industry that's behind probably in technology. It's trying to catch up. So when we talk about transparency, we'd like to build a platform connecting breeders, seed companies, farmers, distributors, restaurant chains, and consumers all together. And that's a huge undertaking. And also, the food industry, some may say it's broken in this country, really going up against the traditional food system and trying to do something different poses many challenges because they don't necessarily want to change. Extreme weather conditions affecting crops is another major risk, a challenge we face. And really just scaling what we do and getting customers to see the value in how we're approaching our supply chain as we get bigger and ramp up faster is something that investors and whatnot ask me and our company all the time. So we're excited to take on that challenge. Thanks.
And last but not least, Kelly, can you share what you said?
Hi, my name's Kelly Liu, and I'm a sustainability manager at Cisco. I'm focusing particularly on human rights in the supply chain. Cisco, you might have seen our logo in Erwin's presentation earlier. We are the worldwide technology leader that's been making the internet work since 1984. We pioneered the technology that connects everything, and we continue to develop technology that's going to provide our clients with highly secure and intelligent platforms for their business. Through our technology, we've been helping to accelerate global problem solving, and we've been making some impact in social and environmental issues. So we knew that in order to address climate change, we needed to focus on our own global operations and within our supply chain. But this also extends to the solutions that we provide our customers so that they can improve their operations and their products. We were recently ranked second on Barron's 100 most sustainable companies, and we're also a CDP A-list supply chain leader. So we've had a legacy of driving positive social and environmental impact. And in 2016, we announced a goal to impact 1 billion people by 2025 through digital solutions. And one of the ways that we do that is through the Cisco Networking Academy. This is an education and employment platform that's been training students around the world for more than 20 years. Our goal in that space is to impact 2 million students a year by 2020. And then particularly in supply chain, we've been making impact there as well. On the social side, in 2004, we helped found the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition, which is a total mouthful. But today it's known as the Responsible Business Alliance. And since we have a fully outsourced supply chain, we wanted to make sure that there were particular standards that were being scaled throughout the supply chain to ensure that responsible manufacturing and responsible business was taking place. So we helped develop the RBA Code of Conduct. And having a code of conduct is really the foundation for ensuring that responsible business is taking place within our supply chain that's aligned to ILO and UN conventions. In the environmental space, we knew that we couldn't keep running our business the same way that we have been. And the planet, natural resources are being depleted faster than they're being regenerated. So we've been heavily engaged in circular economy. We know that we can't build and produce our products the same way. So we're looking at how we design and build them with circular concepts. We are looking at how we're reusing reusing and recycling our assets, and how we're using technology to support our customers through their own digital transformations. So within our circular operations work, we set a goal in 2016 to avoid 1 million metric tons of GHG emissions by 2020 within our Scope 3 emissions. And I proudly announce that we announced this earlier this week that we've actually met that goal a year ahead of time. And so in meeting that goal ahead of time, this really was an important first step in ensuring that we had the data that we needed to put in more ambitious targets. So I'm sure we're going to get into more examples as we get through the panel questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So after introduction, there are kind of three topics that I wanted us to talk a little bit more about today. It's looking at the entire supply chain, it's looking at energy and social components. And the first one is looking at what happens with global supply chain. So there was a recent report by CDP showing what fraction of emissions in the supply chain actually comes from a specific company. And you can see that it varies a lot across the industries, for those of you who can see. For those of you who can't see, the summary, the average is that they estimated that a company supply chain usually on average emits 5.5 times more emission than a company itself. So individual company can only do as much as they can in reducing the emissions within supply chain. There has to be some collaboration with upstream and downstream supply chain members. And it can actually, as you can see in the last quote, just by doing some things that are good for the environment, the company can, in fact, improve its efficiency and save money. So it's not just expenses, it's not just doing good for the environment, but it can also lead to savings. And so many companies actually figuring out that they need to do more for across the entire supply chains, not just focusing on their operations. And I wanted to ask you guys a little bit. So Kelly, you already said something about the initiatives you guys are doing, the alliances, reducing Scope 3 emissions, and so on. So I wanted to hear a little bit from the rest of the panel. So, for instance, so Kevin, can we go in the reverse order now? Can you?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So first of all, I just want to say Sweet Green was founded 12 years ago by 3 millennials, seniors from Georgetown University, and for them, sustainability is a non-starter, the only way to approach. So we our company is just immersed with every function, so it's pretty unique. But with that, the education and learning that is expected from myself and everybody on the team is very high. We're constantly trying to keep up and understand what's going on in the food system. So with that, we again, I mentioned the decentralized model. We have folks on the supply chain team called value chain coordinators that go out and really connect authentically and create long-term relationships with growers. Again, this is it's a distinction for our company, and really what they're tasked to do is find organically grown, no-till farmers, really sustainable leaders in the industry, and create those relationships and set stable pricing for the season of the food is grown in, and come back year after year and as we grow and scale and build those relationships. And with that, there's multiple levels of sustainability there, but really the next phase is what we find in the fields at those farms influences what we serve as a company. We have a commitment to plant forward food, which we think is probably the single largest impactful thing we can do. So, if you've read Dan Barber's The Third Plate, we try to flip it around where the protein is kind of a side to our dish versus being the main part of it. So we work closely with culinary to design dishes that showcase ingredients that we believe in that are sustainably grown. Right now we're looking at kelp very strongly as a great example. We did sunchokes 2 years ago, which is a great story. So then we select a regional distributor and we aggregate all of our farm product down to just a select few distributors, so we're not shopping from multiple sources. So really we have 2 main trucks going to the restaurants each day. And so we really regionalize, localize our supply chain in every market. And so with that, hopefully reducing emissions, etc. And then, the stores themselves is very open and transparent and freshly prepped product, and then it gets to the consumer. So it's sustainability is pretty. We work with that at every single step in the chain.
So the Port of Long Beach, we are not a company that has direct control over any of our own operations, and we're also not a company in the same way that you get to select what products you're buying and where you're sourcing products. We're actually a node in the entire supply chain, and we represent a transfer point, and we're trying to attract businesses to bring their cargo through our transfer point. And so it's a little bit of a balance and a challenge that we have of how do we attract that business, but also make sure that that business is operating in a more sustainable way, which in many cases can bring about additional costs associated with implementing those more sustainable controls. And so trying to make the case that these investments in sustainability really help to further our progress and are good for business in the end, and help us to be able to move forward with modernizing our port and moving forward with new facilities, because we're addressing the impacts that are associated with that. So it's some of the things that we try to do to help move the industry towards more sustainable practices, or use our ability to influence and facilitate. We negotiate with the industry on different terms through our leases, and we also partner with the industry on projects and programs to try to move things forward. We've used our ability to provide incentives to promote certain behaviors. We have a green flag program that's a vessel speed reduction program where we provide dockage discounts to shipping lines that reduce their speed on arrival and departure from the port. And so we provide a economic incentive back to help support those behaviors. And it's been an incredibly successful program. We have 97% of all vessels that call at the Port of Long Beach participating in that program to 20 nautical miles, and 92% participating within 40 nautical miles of the port, purely voluntary through the incentive program. And so it's looking for ways that we can build on those kinds of partnerships and be able to use our ability to influence those behaviors that we're looking to do. We also have requirements through our leases for use of new cleaner equipment, and we've used our tariff, which is essentially the rules of the port, to implement programs like our Clean Truck program. And we're looking to update that as we go forward to get to make progress towards our zero emission goals. So it's using the different tools and practices that we have to work with the industry to help influence the progress that we want to see towards achieving our goals, without being able to directly do that ourselves in our own operations.
So I guess you guys work with them and have to implement those standards.
Shall I go next? I just wanted to emphasize, yes, some of your incentives have actually changed our behaviors.
That's good.
And we do participate. And I see one of the other companies, Brian, sitting there shaking his head yes too. They've actually changed our behaviors, which has actually improved the environment. But part of what's worked there is they didn't just publish something and say you must do this. They worked with stakeholders to figure out how can we do this in a way that works for the shipping, for the vessels, and for the ports and the terminals. So that collaborative effort is really critical to making effective progress. I also wanted to just emphasize something else you said, and that's this whole concept of decoupling growth from environmental impacts. It's something we've been able to do. It's something you've been able to do. I think I've heard a theme running through the panel here of looking at not only what is your total number, but also what is your total number based on growth. Decoupling and efficiency is essential as a first step, and you've got to be measuring that piece as we all try to go to something even better.
Yes, I totally agree. If you So this question was about the industry. So if you look at what a port is, I want to just explain something. When humans became farmers, so we were hunters first, we managed to produce more food than we could eat. So then a market came into the concept of a market came where we trade things, and then more people could join that market, like a shoemaker or a lawyer or whatever, to become a part of it, and that's how cities were developed. So if you go back to history, you find that a city can only exist by the surplus of the goods that the environment around it or the area around it can create. Now, if you know that concept, how cities were established, and then you look to the future where megapolises in 2100 are going to, be established, like Dar es Salaam and Mumbai and some others in Africa, having over 100 million people, inhabitants in their cities. This is just United Nations reports mentioning this. If you then think about the area that has to be created to feed and to supply these cities, it doesn't exist. So ports will become more and more important in the future to supply these cities of all the goods that the people will need. Toilet paper, pencils, whatever you can imagine. Now, having said that, the United Nations reports also says that the maritime sector is one of the most pollutive industries on Earth. So there will be more ships, bigger ports in the future necessary to provide these cities from food and etc. So it's a radical change, the coming decades, that we have to provide as ports, because as a port we are a 5-star luxury hotel for vessels. This is exactly what my colleague of the port of Long Beach was mentioning. We are a transportation node in the supply chain. This means that the supply chain from city to ports, vice versa, has to be improved dramatically, and the pollution of the maritime and port sector has to decrease dramatically. So this is the future. Now, this is just 1 century away. So 3 generations as of now that these cities will be on the planet Earth. So this is the whole thing behind the position of and the vulnerability of the supply chains from cities to ports, because we need more systems, to make the supply chain efficient, and there, comes the threat of cyber attacks, etc. So, this is also why Cisco is involved with us, of course. But, if you look at the concept, we as a port want to guide the next generations into that direction. That we have to become much more sustainable and much less pollutive.
Thank you. So the next slide, it's business power autonomy, and I borrowed this phrase from Biosphere Rules by Gregory Under. So if you look at emissions, this is just California data from last year. You can see that a lot of emissions are coming from industry, from transportation, etc. So many things that are related to supply chains are responsible for creating a lot of emissions. And despite all of these talks about having to reduce the emissions, for instance, we can see here that US is producing now more oil than ever and more natural gas than ever. So we have an increased production of fossil fuels that we keep saying that we should be replaced with something. And manufacturing has relied historically primarily on fossil fuels. And if you want to have sustainable concept, we should move away from them and move to some more renewable fuels. And we talked about some of the things that Maersk is doing, kind of shifting to different types. They have the great goal of zero emissions by 2050. So how about the rest of the panel? So what are some of the things looking at energy independence, power autonomy, kind of using renewable fuels that are happening in your companies and your supply chain?
So I can start briefly. So I had mentioned at the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles in our Clean Air Action Plan update established goals to get to zero emissions. And so we're looking at ways that we can bring in new technologies that aren't dependent on fossil fuels, but ultimately produce no emissions at the tailpipe. And so we're looking at developing and demonstrating battery electric technologies, fuel cell technologies. In the transition, looking at ultra low NOx engines that run on renewable natural gas, and looking at ways that we can bring in cleaner technologies that can perform the work but do it with much less pollution. And our primary driver for that is really about reducing the emissions and addressing the air quality, community health, and climate change goals. But these are challenges that we're working on doing that can provide multiple benefits. Coupled with that, we're also working on our energy initiative, where we're looking at ways that we can be able to supply power and have a reliable power supply as we're moving towards equipment that will rely more on electrical power. And so we're testing a microgrid right now, looking at energy storage and solar arrays all connected on a microgrid to provide power, and what kind of benefits that might be able to provide for us so that we could scale that up and install that as infrastructure in other areas of the port where that makes sense. So that's something that we're also investing in as well.
About the rest of the panel?
I can go next. I'll answer that question on two dimensions, the first being our own operations. So we had a goal to reduce our absolute emissions by 60% by 2022. So that's scope 1 and 2 emissions. And right now, we're at about 45%. We'll be releasing some more numbers in the next 6 months when our CSR report comes out. But we've done this by investing more than $45 million over a 5-year period in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And that comes out to over 300 different projects in energy efficiency and renewable energy. I mentioned that in our supply chain, we met our scope 3 emissions goal early. And because of that, we've been able to set more ambitious targets. So we really took the IPCC findings to heart and decided to focus on absolute emissions. So our new targets that we've just announced this week are that we're going to reduce Cisco's upstream supply chain GHG emissions by 30% absolute by FY30. And then on the supply chain side, that 80% by spend of Cisco's components, manufacturing, and logistics suppliers are going to have to put in reduction targets, absolute reduction targets by 2025. So we've talked about collaboration. That's the type of activity that you're going to see from Cisco in the next coming years, because we really believe in being able to collaborate so that we can all meet our goals.
And the guys?
Sure. Well, Sweetgreen's still a young company, and to be transparent, a lot of our focus has been setting up, when you look at water, waste, energy, really around waste and waste diversion, and all of our packaging is compostable, and so we found that the infrastructure to support that was lacking. So we had to figure out ways to get our compostable materials to facilities that could properly take care of it. Along with that, this year we really started to build a baseline for our energy and water usage in the stores, which is for us, we're heavily involved with our supply chain, but it's hard to manage hundreds of farmers and what their outputs are. But what we're starting to baseline our energy and our water waste in the stores, and our goal is to put in is an energy monitoring system in each store, and then really look at some carbon offset programs to mitigate that. The other thing that's really interesting when we get back to the supply chain itself is over 70% of our product is organic or local on average throughout the year, and that's each market. Boston's very different than San Francisco and LA. Organic practices, we believe, require fewer inputs that are oil-based, etc. And then local, we define it as within 250 miles. So we have a lot of product being produced close to where our restaurants are, being transported and aggregated down to just, again, those few trucks, once or a couple times a week. For produce, it's every day. But so we don't have metrics against what that is, but or what that provides. But from a sustainability practice, we believe that it's a better approach to take. So.
Yes, as a Port of Rotterdam, as I mentioned, we want to comply to the Paris treatment and reducing the greenhouse gases by 80% in 2030 and be completely neutral in 2050. We started up a lot of collaboration. This is the word because it's international and you can't solve it as you are on your own. So we started a lot of programs and initiatives to look at cleaner options within the supply chain and within in the energy sector. Things you will find out on the sheets. I think the sheets will become available after the session. But it's even like the Container 42 initiative. We put a solar roof on top of it, so it's completely self-supplying its energy. With batteries inside, so even when it's not, when it's in the stack and not on top of it, it will last for 30 days autonomously. And it's just to inspire the industry. The energy industry is very slow in changing the attitudes, of course, because regarding the investments of their facilities, etc. But we're trying to inspire them to look at things in a different way. So even if a container, if a container vessel in the future would have solar panels on top of every container, then it could supply energy to its to batteries, and the batteries could power the engine. These are just the concepts that we are working on and for inspiration. Because we are a transportation node, very important in Europe, but we only are a part of the network. So we try to inspire the industries around us and take a leading role in that. So this is basically our story.
Thank you. And so the last topic I wanted to mention is looking not only at environment, but also the social part of corporate social responsibility, looking at human condition. And especially as we have more global supply chains, there are more issues with things such as forced labor, which becomes a big problem when you look at some of the locations that companies have to deal with. That can have a big impact also on their reputation, not only on local conditions. And as you can see, kind of several of the regions, so Asia Pacific and so on, have a huge amount of profit coming actually from forced labor. And another thing that is also happening increasingly is automation. When I visited my class, one of the things was what is Paul doing with all these automated devices and how does it impact labor conditions. And feelings of that workers have. So automation can help in increasing efficiency and productivity. At the same time, it can make some of the jobs redundant. So, for instance, there is quite a lot of jobs that are becoming kind of almost extinct, but there are new jobs opening as well because of automation and robotics. And so I wanted just to see how are these issues, how do they impact your specific supply chains, your companies, what are you doing about it? And Kelly, I know that this is kind of your focus, so if you want to start about this.
I can. You might have to make me stop because this is most of my job. So I mentioned that we have a code of conduct, and the code of conduct covers labor, health and safety, environment, most of the issues that we're very familiar with. And when we find that we have a supplier that's not conforming to our values, we work with them to put in corrective action plans. We have particular number of days where they need to remediate and fix those particular issues. Forced labor is an issue that I deal with, in addition to issues with young workers. And so in 2017, we conducted a human rights impact assessment in the supply chain, looking at gaps and opportunities of where we were operating according to the UN guiding principles for business and human rights. And so the issues that really surfaced there were freely chosen employment, also known as forced labor, bonded labor, young worker safety, pollution prevention, the ethical sourcing of raw materials, as if you are part of the electronic sector, you know this as responsible minerals or conflict minerals, and promoting reskilling for the future of work. So Grace mentioned, what are we doing with automation and AI coming onto the scene? We've been conducting quite a bit of research. Cisco put out a white paper with Oxford Economics looking at how those jobs are being impacted in the ASEAN region. We know that some jobs are going away, but many are going to be created as well. So how can we make our supply chain resilient to that type of change? So I've been looking at different job roles within supply chain. As we can imagine, there are many, many different types of jobs of many, many different skill levels. So I'm trying to focus on just a few that I think are going to be very impactful to business so that they'll be sustainable as we move forward to Industry 4.0. We're also looking at some of our own solutions. So I mentioned the Cisco Networking Academy. How can we expand that to workers beyond just students around the world? Going back to college is not necessarily the right solution for everyone. So we're trying to find different opportunities to train workers while they're on the job.
Okay. You want to go next?
Well, I think I covered several of those as I went through. As I mentioned, for example, when we went into India to start to build capacity for responsible ship recycling, first we had to teach people what was responsible ship recycling, what were our expectations, and do that initial training in safety and so forth. But then, of course, we then have to reinforce that. And we're also advocating for global standards that will ensure that all of the people working in that part of the industry have access to good training and good safety equipment and that kind of thing. We take a lot of these things for granted here in the United States and in North America, but they're not universal. And it's easy to get blindsided by something that, as you well know, Kelly, things that you just can't imagine are happening. But some of it is happening here too. One of the folks from Hewlett Packard pointed out to me, there's an association called Truckers Against Trafficking, that if you are not familiar with it and you're involved in trucking, you should know about it. An awful lot of sex trafficking is visible at truck stops. And so the truckers have the opportunity to observe things, and Truckers Against Trafficking has actually set up an 800 number so they can call in and report it anonymously or not anonymously. So there's so many things that we can do if we just are aware of what's going on along all of these nodes in the supply chain. And then just let me reemphasize training, retraining, because everything we do moves and changes. And so we have to help our people along the way to do that too.
I can provide a little bit of information about Port of Long Beach's involvement in this. I think that this is an important topic of discussion. I think that there is a lot of interest in what's happening with this because we are at a point of potential change in the industry, and we are seeing some of the operations at the ports move towards automation and look at that as an operating mode. We at the Port of Long Beach have our Middle Harbor facility, which is a large automated electrified facility that we're entering into the final stages of construction on, and so it will be fully operational here in the next couple of years. But I think that there's a lot of folks in the industry that are looking at that operation and seeing what that potentially means. And I think to your point about does it mean fewer jobs? Does it mean the same number of jobs? Does it mean different jobs? I think that's a lot of what folks are looking at right now, and what the needs are from a training perspective, and what kind of programs we need to make sure that we have in place so that the workers of the future are trained to be able to operate this changing equipment. At the Middle Harbor facility, there's actually more workers, or will be more workers at the new facility than there was at their old traditionally operated facility, because the size and the scale of the operation is much larger. But those jobs are different. And some of the work that we're doing with the demonstration projects for zero emission equipment, the demonstrations that we're doing are actually all traditionally operated equipment with drivers, but doing it with zero emission equipment. So we have zero emission yard tractors, zero emission top picks, zero emission rubber tire gantry cranes that are the same as the traditionally operated equipment. It's just using a cleaner technology. But that change in that equipment also has an effect on the workers that operate that equipment. The maintenance requirements of the maintenance workers to be able to support that equipment, and also on the electrical side, building out the infrastructure and making sure that we have a trained workforce to be able to provide the infrastructure that we need. So some of these demonstration projects that we're doing, we're working with Long Beach City College, we're working with the Labor Union's International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, ILWU. We're working with some of the different folks that are involved in providing that labor to look at the training programs that exist, where there are gaps, where we need to make sure that we're looking at improving training programs so that the workers in the future are prepared to be able to support that equipment as we go forward. And where we also, well, separately from the operations that we're doing, but where the port directly contracts for work on our construction projects, we do have project labor agreements working with the trade unions and looking at ways that we can make sure that we're looking at opportunities for local hire and hiring of veterans and disabled workers, and have dispute resolution incorporated into each of those major projects. And so we're looking at ways that we can continue to work closely with the labor that needs to be provided, and thinking about ways that we can be addressing all of the concerns that folks have.
Well, I wanted just to add something to this. I think this is going to be a hell of a topic for the future, because if you see what is going to happen in automated, and it will affect any industry, by the way, AI technology. Don't think that you will get away with it. So this will be, one of the topics that will be on the agenda for every company in the next few years. We did a test with AI, and in just 12 weeks, we took photos of fenders and traffic signs just as a pilot. In just 12 weeks, 85% of the traffic signs and 75% of the fenders, these are the protection of key walls, between the ship and the key wall. 85% of the traffic signs and 70% of the fenders were recognized as the object, the classification of the object, a stop sign or whatever sign, or type of fender, the location where it was. So actually pinpointing in our database, this is this asset, this number, and also the status in 12 weeks. Based on 10,000 photos or something, the algorithm trained itself. So in the future, our inspectors will be cars autonomously driven with cameras on it, taking pictures and automatically sending work orders to the contractors. So this is the changing world we are in, and we are, within 5 years of that stage within the Port of Rotterdam. So it's going to affect the whole industry. For Western Europe and the US and Japan, they are coping with aging of people. In Holland, a lot of people are going to retire in the coming years. So there's a knowledge transfer going on over there. But the knowledge transfer won't be from human to human. It will be from human to system. This is the things going to happen, and every company will have to cope with the social responsibility towards that. That's how the future in my head is looking like.
Sure, I would agree with that. We're definitely seeing AI and robotics affecting the restaurant industry. The labor pool for restaurant industry is high turnover, and there's a severe shortage. So I think in the short to medium run, if done correctly, it's going to be a benefit to kind of change the jobs, make them more thoughtful, and create more efficiencies, and hopefully longer tenure for employees who want to be a part of Sweetgreen. We do couple that with commitment to industry leading benefits that we're pretty proud of. So, but we just have a newly formed automation team, literally 3 people hired over the last few months, and I met with them yesterday, and they are very, very conscious of the social aspect of what they're going to be doing and how we're going to address that situation. So I feel pretty confident that it's going to be a win-win-win, as we say. It's one of our core values moving forward. Where I see it, looking at the supply chain level, again, at the farm level, some of the labor issues there and the robotic solutions and whatnot that are kind of emerging. I'm very intrigued with where all that is heading, because, again, that is another area that there's a dire need for positive change. And I'm optimistic that instead of labor camps, etc., harvesting crops and non-ideal conditions in this country, maybe those jobs start to evolve into more robotics, machine learning, AI type technology to support that.
So this would cover all of my questions, and I know the lunch already started, but perhaps a question or two from the audience, if anybody has a question for our panelists. Or everybody just thinking about food now?
Where's the nearest Sweetgreen?
Great question. There's a couple in downtown LA. There's I think there's 13 or 14 in LA. Some in Santa Monica, Culver City, Hollywood, Marina Del Rey. We're kind of in a band up here, but not in Orange County just yet. But we have plans to expand pretty rapidly.
And how long?
Stay tuned.
In the past, the paradigm of business has been that you bring in technology to increase efficiency. And the way you were talking, in the future, we're going to keep the human element part of the equation. We're going to be choosing to decrease efficiency while employing people at the right point. That way, it's trending.
I don't think so. No way. think when money is involved, you go for the profit. And the profit will come from robots and AI technology. And a lot of spare time for humankind to be poets and painters and whatever. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, the only cybersecurity will be the main threat of this trend, so to speak. And but I don't know. Maybe we get a new French Revolution against the robotics or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. But it's going to impact us all.
So it's the short question.
Just to make a comment, in technology, it is going there. The role and nature of work is going to change. This is not just in our industry, but our industry tends to be on the forefront of some of this will be visible. Some people are finally starting to talk about it, but it will change. And it's very difficult when people are going for efficiencies. Many enterprises are here to get the maximum profit. And
Well,
yes, the cybersecurity implications, and we deal with it at the point, but it really is a much bigger discussion.
But it's different. It's not about being efficient anymore. So the algorithms, that we tested proved us that we are not, from a department of 100 people as a number, just as an example, we are not going to decrease 3 FTEs to go down to 97. No, there will be 3 left. This is the thing. This is the thing that's gonna happen. It's not gonna, it's not gonna be implemented in the old processes world. Objects are going to talk with one another. A container is going to fill in its own customs form. There's no human interaction anymore. A container is ordering its transportation in the future. There's no human interaction anymore. If you send a container from Singapore to Rotterdam, there are 30 parties involved in one container handling. Expediting, whatever, customs, whatever. 30 parties. There's no one involved anymore. This is the mind shift.
So let's thank our speakers.